Welcome to Atanasta Chapter 13 Beta, in which we talk about relative clauses. So first we need to talk about relative pronouns, and we'll take a step backwards to define pronoun. So for example, in our sentence, Anne likes cookies, she eats them every day, the pronouns are she and them. Each pronoun refers back to an antecedent. The antecedent of she is Anne, which means that she refers back to Anne. And the antecedent of them is cookies, which means that them refers back to cookies. Every pronoun agrees with its antecedent in gender and number. So Anne is a female and singular, so we use she. And cookies are plural, so we use them. In English, we don't distinguish in the plural between feminine people and neuter things. Every pronoun takes its case from its function in its own clause. So she is the subject pronoun because she is the subject of its sentence. Them is the object pronoun because them is the object of its sentence. If I want to say, for example, they are delicious, where they refers back to cookies, even though cookies was the object of its sentence, they is the subject of its sentence, so we use they instead of them. So now let's talk specifically about the relative pronoun. A relative pronoun introduces a subordinate clause, specifically one we call a relative clause, and this particular subordinate clause answers questions like which one or how many or what kind. Notice that we're not asking a question, we're answering a question. So an English example is the person who does something, or the person whose book I have, or the person whom I like. If we're talking about things, we use which, the thing which is on the table. Notice that this is different from interrogative pronouns, which ask a question, like who are you? You'll see that there's a question mark at the end, and we are asking a question rather than answering a question. So now let's talk about the relative pronoun in Greek. The Greek forms look somewhat like the definite article, so don't confuse the two. And then, as I mentioned in the previous slide, the English translations are not to be confused with interrogative pronouns that ask a question. So here are the Greek forms. You'll notice the difference between these and the definite articles is the lack of a tau at the beginning of the oblique cases, and then also the rough breathing at the beginning of all of them. So in English, if we're talking about people, it doesn't matter if it's masculine, feminine, or neuter in Greek, but if it refers to people, we're going to use one set of English pronouns, and if it refers to things, we'll use a different set. So for people, nominatives will be translated who, genitives as whose, datives, depending on how it's being used in the sentence, might be to whom, and then accusatives are translated as whom. So if we're talking about things, and remember that in Greek, things can be masculine or feminine or neuter, but when we translate this into English, we want to use the proper pronouns for English things. So that's usually which or that. In the genitive of which, and in the dative, again, depending on how it's being used in the sentence, to which, and the accusative is simply which. So let's look at a Greek example. Deca nees makrai ephainonto hai proston pairea eporeuonto. 10 warships were visible, high, which we're going to translate as which, were sailing towards Piraeus. So our pronoun is high. It refers back to nees, the antecedent. Both of these are feminine plural. So ships happens to be a feminine noun in Greek, and we are talking about it in the plural, which means that the relative pronoun high must both also be feminine and plural. Nees happens to be the subject in its clause, so it's nominative, but none of that matters because what we care about is how is high functioning in its clause. High is the subject of eporeuonto, and therefore it is also nominative. Notice that in English, even though this Greek word is feminine and therefore the Greek pronoun is feminine, we don't translate the ships as who, but rather as which. That's it for now, and I will see you next time.